Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you so much.
Kris, gasoline taxes in Vancouver, the highest in North America, and the prices at the pump, the highest in North America. Now, I just did a little thing here, like people are paying $1.65 a liter with gasoline at $73 a barrel. When oil was at $149 a barrel, we only paid $1.50. What's going on here? How can they excuse those kind of prices?
It's pretty crazy. And so while, as you point out, the cost of oil will go up and down, and the actual cost of gasoline that the retailer is selling it at will go up and down, the one element that we know for certain at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is what portion of that is taxes. And so if you take a look, for example, in Vancouver, about 68 cents of that, the price at the pump that you're paying right now between Langley and North Van, are taxes. We've got two carbon taxes, the first regular one, and the second one is a regulatory, bit of cost that's wedged in there. And then we have the TransLink tax, which is 18.5 cents. Then we have the federal excise tax, provincial excise tax, and sales tax. So when you add that all up, it's about 68 cents per liter. That, again, as you point out, is by far the highest gas tax rate in Canada and in North America. If you even take a look at California, they don't pay the same in gas taxes. And so if folks want to see lower prices at the pump, the one element that we can get them to drop would be the taxes level. And they need to start saying so to their politicians, because the politicians think that nobody cares about gas taxes. They're wagering on that, and they think that they're just going to be able to cruise through this summer with people paying $1.70 per liter for gasoline, and nobody's going to peep about it. Well, they have to.
The Conservative leader, Aaron O'Toole, says he's going to charge a carbon tax. He's going to call it something different than a tax, but he still plans to charge one. Are there any alternatives for Canadians who don't want to pay through the nose when they have to get groceries for their family or take their kids to school?
Unfortunately, no, not right now. As you rightly point out, the Conservative Party for years consistently, rank and file, have been 100% against carbon taxes for years and years and years. And previous people have tried to run for leadership while campaigning on a carbon tax, and they've always come in near dead last. They'll get booed out of the room. In debates, they'll get just killed. O'Toole signed our pledge, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation pledge, that he would scrap Justin Trudeau's carbon tax and that he would not impose one of his own. He completely backtracked on that promise, did a 180, ripped it up, lied, whatever term you want to use. He's gone back on it, and now he's not only going to impose his own carbon tax that he calls something else, and we don't care what he calls it, it's a tax, and this is key. He's also going to have the second carbon tax that I talked about. And like I said, it's a fuel standard that's tucked into government regulations. Here in BC, for example, that second carbon tax is about 14 cents per liter. That's why the prices out here are often so eye-watering, along with the fact that our supply is pinched off quite often. We're very, very dependent on Washington State for gasoline products. And guess what? When demand goes up south of the border, we come last. They won't ship it out to us first. They always deal with their domestic customers first. So you do that, you combine that with our second carbon tax. This is why we have the highest fuel prices at the pumps. So yeah, O'Toole thinks that's awesome. He's actually said directly that he's basing his second carbon tax on the British Columbia example. And ours is even higher than the one Trudeau was planning. Last time I checked, the carbon tax regulation, fuel standard, blah, blah, that Trudeau was planning on was around 7 to 9 cents per liter. Ours here is 14. And Trudeau's is actually the first carbon tax, the one that everybody pays right now, he's planning on jacking that up to $170 a ton. That'll be around 37 cents a liter. That's within the next 9 years. So sad to say, there's not one major party, and who knows what the NDP wants federally, there's not one major party right now in Ottawa that is not a huge carbon tax cheerleader. We thought the Conservatives were against it, but they backstabbed everybody. So if people want to vote on this issue, they better pick up the phone and they better tell these MPs and these candidates that this is a voting issue for them. And who knows, maybe there'll be a new party that starts up. Stranger things have happened, especially in Western Canada, and they've made a big movement and a big impact. And so if people don't want to be paying these carbon taxes, they need to demand as much from their candidates.
BC's had carbon taxes the longest of any province in Canada. Have they reduced emissions?
No. And again, this is just what's so frustrating about this, is that we'll often have federal politicians saying bizarre things like, BC is a great success story, and we're going to use BC as a carbon tax example. We're a terrible example. It's an expensive waste out here. We've had the highest carbon tax since 2008, and our emissions are going up. And this is not, just something you pick up off the internet. This is government data that is posted on the United Nations website. It's an official submission by both the Trudeau government yearly and the Horgan government yearly, posts it on their own website, the government of BC. Our emissions have gone up 11% in the past 4 years, and I think they've gone up in 6 consecutively of the last 8 on record. It's not working. And even if it were somehow working and our emissions were going down by a little tiny bit here in BC, it actually wouldn't make a big difference at all on the global scale. Because right now, all of Canada accounts for less than 2% of global emissions. And before people say, well, we have to do our part, yes, I know we have to do our part. So if we're below 2% of global emissions, that means if we stopped everything right now, if we all sat here and starved to death and froze to death in the wintertime and stopped doing everything, it wouldn't make a difference. But if we do care about climate change in that way, if that's your key concern, if your listener has a key concern about climate change and it's about emissions, if we sell natural gas to places like India, they will get off of very dirty forms of fuel like wood scrap and animal dung and really dirty forms of coal in many cases. If they switch to cleaner burning natural gas, we will dramatically reduce their emissions. And there's 250 million of them burning like that. So if we do that, then global emissions will actually go down. That will make a big impact on the environment. So if folks want to make change, sell natural gas to India. Don't nuke people for driving their minivans in Langley.
Vancouver City Council officially against oil and gas exploration. What would that do to Canada's and BC's economy?
Just think about it. I'll give you an example. Not even with the royalties. Okay, not even with the royalties that come off of oil and gas, and let's pretend somehow if we look around ourselves that not every single thing around us is made from oil and gas or produced by it or delivered to us using it. Let's take all that out of the equation. Let's look just at the federal taxes. So between 2013 and 2023, because we do not have our proper full pipeline capacity in Canada, we are losing out on $13 billion with a B just in the federal taxes. And what that is the income taxes that Joe and Sally would be making in that industry with proper pipeline capacity and all that jazz, the income taxes they would be paying. We're missing out on about $13 billion. I think that would build 3 or 4 St. Paul's hospitals. So that's just an indicator of this tiny slice of federal tax that comes out of this. So we are a country that depends on our natural resources for our wealth. Frankly, we should have a lot more wealth, but the government mismanages our money to a terrible extent. We should be more like Norway. We should have been managing our natural resources, including oil and gas, much better, and we might have a huge rainy day fund by now, but we don't. So we're very dependent on our natural resources. We can't just turn them off. And it's disappointing when we see very privileged people who live in a very easy climate to live in. That's Vancouver. So even if you slept outside on your balcony all day, all year, chances are you probably wouldn't freeze to death. That's one of the rare places in all of Canada that you can say that, actually. Most places drop way down below zero. But here in leafy, warm, temperate Vancouver, they've got it pretty good. And a lot of those politicians and bureaucrats live a quick bike ride away from where they work at City Hall on West 12th. So it's easy for them to say, oh, well, we should keep it in the ground. That's not reality outside of that little tiny urban bubble they live in. And I really, really wish that they realized how dependent they are on natural resources that include natural gas and oil and gas.
California is telling people not to charge their electric cars because of the record heat wave that's hit them and people are using their air conditioning. The lower mainland of British Columbia is about to be hit by a record-setting heat wave with temperatures around 37 degrees, body temperature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're being told to turn down or turn off our air conditioning. How can we power electric cars when we can't even survive a heat wave without a fleet of electric cars out there?
That's a great question. And every time I take a look at, and they're not even tax experts, these are energy experts. I mean, they do deep dives into data about how much energy people use, state by state, country by country. And that's exactly right. The state of California is asking people to stop charging their electric vehicles because they can't take it. The grid does not have enough juice to take it. And keep in mind, that's in sunny California. That's where people have been, cheerleading and hoping for electric cars now for years. It's supposed to be part of their culture, and they still can't do it. Up here in BC, what's really mind-boggling is we'll have people say things like, oh, well, go electric, as if, number one, everybody can just afford to flip that switch. If people could just afford to do that, don't you think people would have done it already? That kind of defies common sense. And then also, quite often, this is what's weird, quite often the same folks who say, oh, well, we hate oil and gas, leave it in the ground, stop, switch to electric, those are often the same folks who are against big hydroelectric dam projects like Site C. Now, whether or not Site C's got its own, structural issues or not, or viability or not, all that stuff, we know that people are arguing about that. But just to the principle of it, a lot of these same folks are 100% opposed to big hydroelectric projects, dams like that. So where do they think that we're going to get the energy from? So something's got to give here. Folks need to realize that human beings need energy to survive, and that we are going to use the natural resources of Mother Earth. We just need to figure out a way to do it in the best way possible. And right now, a lot of folks, the vast majority of the population of Canada is still dependent on oil and gas. We can't just switch to electric tomorrow. It's just not going to work. We need better politicians and better leaders, frankly, so that they can plan for this future better.
Well, it's all nice to think about a perfect world where everything's electric, and apparently this power is free because the cost of heating or cooling your home using electricity is much higher than it is using natural gas.
Of course, exactly. It goes through the roof. Most people I know who have baseboard heaters in their home somewhere don't use them. They keep them shut off in the winter because they just can't afford it. So something's got to give here. Folks need to stay warm in the winter, and especially with a heat wave like this coming through now, they need to stay cool in the summer. We need to refrigerate our food. We need to have grocery stores that are lit and air conditioned and have big freezers. We have to have livestock that is produced to eat meat. We have to have crops. There's so much energy just compounded that goes into everyday life. And if we make all of those energy sources unaffordable, what do folks think is going to happen? This is not something that you can just pretend you're living on. This is not a video game. This is not some, little commune that you're imagining with your friends in the Kootenays somewhere. This is real life. It's heavy industry. It's urban. It's suburban. People need to think this through more clearly. And jacking up taxes, for example, on something as basic as a liter of gasoline is going to increase the cost of living for tons of people. So there are folks in the Fraser Valley from, Hope to Chilliwack to Abbotsford, Langley, you name it. They can barely afford rent and mortgage as it is. And they've moved out there quite often, or they choose to live out there quite often because that's the only place they can kind of sort of afford. Even then, it's still crazy expensive. And then they need to commute to work. And now they're paying the highest gasoline prices and gas taxes in all of North America. So they're paying through the nose. And they can't even go across the border to save themselves $30 a fill-up every single time they fill up because the border's shut. So people are really feeling the affordability crunch here, and the high taxation on an essential energy service like gasoline is a big reason why.
Something else that British Columbia doesn't look at, even though it's based, is a company called Blue Energy Canada. It's based in Richmond. They use tidal power. Now, I know they have projects around the world making power from, well, I guess it's the power of the moon, really, that runs the tides. But the place that doesn't use it is BC. And yet, because of Vancouver Island, our tides all arrive at different times as you go up and down the coast. So we would have a constant power, and yet British Columbia, the name BC Hydro says it all. If it's not a hydro project, they don't even look at anything else, apparently.
Well, it's a good idea to test these things out, especially if it's not costing taxpayers an arm and a leg, because it's important for us to have diverse energy services. We can't become dependent wholly on one service provider because, well, you shouldn't even need to explain why that's not a good idea, because what happens if it gets too expensive or something bad happens to it? So you need to have a lot of different backup alternatives, and we're getting ourselves painted into a corner here. So yeah, that might be something they could look at. I've also done a decent amount of reading now on the amount of testing they're doing on what they call modular nuclear, which is a very, very small form of a nuclear reactor. They're doing a lot of research on it in the prairies right now. And one of the first things I asked the gentleman who was talking about it, he's a physicist, I said, well, what about the spent rods or, the waste that comes out of it? He said they figured out a way to reuse it over and over again.
And, if you use helium as a coolant, helium doesn't have an extra electron to become radioactive.
Oh, isn't that it? I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. Another reason why we shouldn't be using helium for party balloons, because it's needed for scientific reasons. But I read an article on that.
Wow. See, there's always a way forward, and we just need better leadership to get there.
And Canada's got the brains to do it, the educational power, and the young people who have great innovative minds. Do we have the politicians, though, who can keep up with that?
No, because they're the ones that are sitting in an air-conditioned building in downtown Vancouver saying we need to stop oil and gas. Makes no sense.
With car bonuses and guaranteed incomes and so on.
Absolutely, while wearing their nylon jackets and, playing on their iPhones, which are made all 100% of natural resources, including some rare earth minerals. So go figure.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, Vancouver business owners are up in arms over rapidly, highly increasing property taxes that, with a pandemic on and reduced business, are unaffordable before this all started. Now they're getting bills for the new year, and some of them have doubled. Is this sustainable, considering that Montreal and Toronto have decided there will not be property tax hikes this year?
It's absolutely not sustainable, and this gets back to the affordability issue. When we talk about affordability and how, hovering around 40% or so of Canadians are within $200 of insolvency every month, meaning that they can't make all their bill payments. This is where it gets really concerning because the same sort of thing is being faced by many business owners. And with what's happened with the pandemic, a lot of them had to shut down or dramatically reduce their hours, and they've seen far fewer customers coming through the door at all. They're not lining up around the street. People are often just staying home. So we need to realize that a lot of business owners have gone deeply into debt to try to even just keep their lights on and stay open. And then we get turned around, and they're often getting hit by crazy tax hikes. And one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons why they're getting big tax hikes is because we have this absolutely absurd system of property valuation and the tax calculation, they're taxed on what they call fairest and best use. So best use, and what that translates to, and this sounds crazy, but it's true, say you are a Mexican restaurant and you've been on the corner of A Street and B Street for 30 years. You are single story. You've been paying a certain amount of tax based on what you are, a single story commercial restaurant with a certain amount of square footage. Okay? Now a bureaucrat has come along and says, well, I am envisioning a 6-story condo with a swimming pool on top of it and a heated parking garage underneath. That's what you really could be, so we're going to tax you based on what I've imagined you could be. That's actually what's happening. It sounds banana pants, and it is, but these business owners are actually having this happen to them. So the premier or whomever has any control over this needs to scrap it. Like, the fact that we even need to say this out loud is crazy. You should be taxed on what you physically own and run in reality, like what exists currently in time and space, not what a bureaucrat imagines you might be.
Well, it's like your car insurance being based on a Lamborghini. You could own one.
Yeah.
Even though you're driving a 2002 Toyota.
Perfect example. Or
yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah, exactly. Say you've got a rancher duplex. You know, you've got 1,200 square feet, and you get to share the garage. Well, you could be living in, Snoop Dogg's house, and it could be a big mansion. So I'm going to tax you based on that. This is the same level of thinking. It's bizarre. I don't know how this was even approved to begin with. I think sometimes politicians bank on the idea that people forget that businesses are people. They think business is just some weird, murky, amorphous thing out there that magically has money and can magically pay any stupid fees or taxes.
Well, they think every business owner is Elon Musk.
That's right, every one of them. And they're not. They're you and me, and they're very normal people. And many times they're in debt. So they need to stop doing this. They should have scrapped this years ago. In fact, it never should have gotten off the ground.
Well, Vancouver wants to tax you on your 2-story business like it's a 72-story tower because that area is zoned for a large high-rise. But try getting a building permit for that high-rise.
Yeah,
it's going to take you a decade or two.
That just adds insult to injury, right? It's like, yeah, you could be a 72-story condo, and maybe that might even provide, a bit more of affordability because there'd be more supply on the market, and there'd be demand for it. It's funny how the economy works, right? But we wouldn't let you do that anyway, so just kidding. Like, it adds insult to injury. This entire situation is absurd. They should not have best use, which I like to call bureaucrat imagination. They should not have that factoring into taxes at all.
The U.S. has fined Air Canada $25.5 million for a lack of refunds. Meanwhile, the Canadian government gives Air Canada a $5.9 billion bailout. The airline responds by giving its executives a $10 million bonus. Apparently, a couple of them gave the money back, but most of them didn't. And people are still having trouble getting refunds. Should the Canadian government be taking a little stiffer line with Air Canada after such a massive bailout?
Sure, and it's mostly the government's fault because they should have been on top of this. This is not their first tryout at this. They've got bureaucrats who've been working in Ottawa for 30 years, and all they do is hand out corporate welfare. I like to envision this gigantic scoop that they hold and just throw our money at companies that don't need it. So they're used to doing this. So they should be really well versed on crossing T's and dotting I's, and they should have known whether or not Air Canada executives were, seconds away from getting a massive bonus before they gave Air Canada the bailout. Now, a big portion of that bailout, thankfully, so far on paper, is supposed to be a loan. So hopefully they hold that part up on the government side. But there's another element in that Air Canada also used the wage subsidy, which was supposed to be an emergency stopgap order during COVID in order to help keep employees of average companies on the payroll. So they took that and they got this loan/bailout, and then they gave out the bonuses. Minister Freeland and her staff should have been all over this. All over this. But they weren't. They just handed out the money. It sounds like no questions asked. Like, did they even have a conversation on the phone before handing out this money? We must say that when you take a look down this cabinet, up and down, it's bad. Like, this government is bad, and it's not because it's a certain party. We'd say this about any party that was behaving in this way while they're in government. They're more than $1 trillion in debt. They farm out a lot of their so-called expertise to think tanks and some of their friends around Ottawa because their cabinet ministers don't have enough experience to get the job done. They are not accountable. We've got a terrible situation going on in the House of Commons right now where they were trying to get documents out of a bureaucrat, and it was a complete mess that was connected all to the pandemic and how we managed it as a government. It's a goat rodeo. It's a big, big mess. We need serious ethics investigations, we need accountability, and we need audits.
Well, it sounds pretty unlikely that's going to happen when we have the Prime Minister suing the Speaker of the House to keep secret the firing of 2 Chinese scientists at the viral research lab in Winnipeg.
Yeah, and that's exactly the element I was mentioning there, where they were trying to compel a bureaucrat to testify. Like, I can't remember the last time that somebody who is not a sitting member of Parliament was called before the rod, as they say. Now, I've seen before where, for example, a member of Parliament has, in their view, behaved badly, and they've been suspended from the House, and they're kind of kicked out, and then they have to come in front of the rod and stand there and, like, make their appeal to get back in, but that's still an MP. This was, quote-unquote a civilian, a bureaucrat. They're trying to get information out of it, and the Speaker said, yeah, like, we absolutely have the right to get information, and was acting quite well, like, as far as we can tell, right within what they're supposed to be doing, and now he's getting sued? Like, this is unprecedented. It's bizarre.
Yeah, considering the Speaker of the House is a Liberal MP.
Exactly, which is why we give him credit for actually standing up to his own party and taking a stand and doing the right thing.
And who has the supreme power in Canada? Parliament or the minority government?
Great question. It should be Parliament. And then it's really interesting. There's Parliament, and then, of course, there's the Senate. And people joke about the Senate, and we do too, because they get paid too much and their pensions are stupid. But they are the ones that give royal assent, because they give the Queen's assent to all of our legislation. We're actually hearing rumblings coming from a lot of senators right now saying that they're not going to pass C-10, which is the very, very controversial law. It's a gag law that they're trying to ram it through before they finish sitting for the summer, because a lot of people are hankering for a summertime election, especially on the government side. And so we're hearing from some senators saying that they're going to do everything they can to dig their heels in and not make it law before the House rises.
Isn't C-10 the censorship of the Internet?
Yes, people need to pay attention to this. So if you're listening to this podcast right now, and it is posted on the Internet, in a few years, once this has all become law, if this becomes law, a bureaucrat at the CRTC, which is just a radio television communication body that lives in the capital region and decides what can and can't be on, say, television or radio, they will then decide what can and can't be on the Internet. And if they're listening to this and they think it's bad, and by bad I mean you could drive a truck through that, their parameters are so wide open, they can decide that it can't get posted, or that your Internet service can be cut off. It's that bad. And so if folks are sitting there listening going, oh, I don't care if Justin Trudeau and his friends at the CRTC decides what I can listen to. I agree with everything he says and thinks. Okay, fine. Would you feel the same way if Prime Minister Stephen Harper were still in power? No? If the answer is no, then that is a bad thing. We cannot have bureaucrats and their political friends deciding what we can and can't say on the Internet. Now, folks are going to try to say, oh, well, it's hate speech. No. We already have very serious federal laws against hate speech. One cannot incite violence or hatred towards any identifiable group. That is a criminal code charge. That's not what we're talking about. They're now trying to say objectionable content, a lot of mushy words into this legislation. So much so that the former chair of the CRTC is blowing the whistle hard, saying that we cannot do this, that it is actually an affront to democracy, and it could eventually affect our democracy, because when you can't gather and you can't share information and express yourself freely, then how are you ever going to push back on government?
This sounds like something we'd hear from the People's Republic of China.
It is.
Or the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea.
It is. And a lot of folks are getting more and more concerned with that. and then when you add in what looks to be strange, I would say, approvals, or what is it that Prime Minister Trudeau said once before he was Prime Minister, an admiration that he had for the basic dictatorship of China, because they can turn people around on a dime, and the lack of work with what's happening with our Canadian hostages over there. A lot of folks who've been on this file now for years, and I mean diplomats with 30 years experience on this file, are wincing at how this federal government deals with China and how admiring they seem to be of some of their behaviors. And this comes from all sides. I've heard from Liberals, I've heard from NDP folks, Conservatives. A lot of people are deeply concerned about C-10. But unfortunately, a big chunk of the NDP seemed like they went along with C-10, and a big portion of the bloc too, because they put in a special, rider for Quebec in order to get them to support it. And keep in mind, they're pushing through this kind of odious legislation with a minority. So if they get a majority, well, what's going to happen then? Apparently there's another kind of a censorship type of a law that they're working on right now. I believe it was just posted last night, so we need to go through the details. And apparently it's even stronger than C-10. So folks, left, right, purple or not, we don't care. If you care about your free expression, you need to read this legislation and you need to speak up. And the only way we can do that is by telling, if somebody knocks on your door and says, I want your vote, bring this up with them immediately. Tell them you won't vote for them based on this issue. That's the only way to get these folks' attention, is to threaten their jobs.
I don't know what movie it was in, but John Wayne once said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death to defend your right to say it. It's hard to find a politician who believes in that nowadays.
Exactly. I believe Voltaire also said that, to paraphrase him, in French, and that's fundamentally important. And I'll even give you a good example, a real-world example. So let's rewind back in time to 2003. U.S. President at the time, George W. Bush, was leading an American invasion war, depending on what term you want to use, of Iraq. A lot of Canadians, left and right actually, but often on the left and in the center, were opposed to Canada going along with our traditional allies. Keep in mind the UK and the US were going in. For us to not go over the boards along with our two friends like that is very rare. So a lot of Canadians were uncomfortable with this, typically in the center left. They were organizing. They were on the internet organizing on different left-wing groups, chat groups, you name it, and they were posting videos, and they were posting audio, and they were having organized rallies, and they organized a huge one using the internet. They organized a huge rally on Parliament Hill in January of 2003. It was like something crazy, like 15,000 people came out. It was, and I remember that day because I was in Ottawa. It was minus 40. Huge rally. A few weeks later, Chrétien saw it. The news covered it. It was a big impact. A few weeks later, Chrétien stood up in the House and said, we're not going. We are not participating with the war in Iraq. So if we had that today going forward, what happens if the government doesn't want to hear that? What if that's really inconvenient for them to have 15,000 people yelling at them on Parliament Hill about whatever reason? Fill in your blank for why you're protesting. They could just stop it. They could just say you're not allowed to post this on the internet anymore. That's really bad. And folks need to really wake up to this. I'm appealing directly to my friends on the left in the civil liberties movement. You gotta get on this.
Kris, how can people get more information about the issues we talked about?
I would really love to hear from them. If they go to our website, taxpayer.com, they can read all about our protests and our petitions against things like carbon taxes and gas taxes, and our concerns from a civil liberty point of view, from an accountability and transparency point of view for all types of government, any ideology. If folks want tips on that, it's all there on our website, and it's how to write a nice, firm letter that will be very clear, how to follow up on the phone in a really effective way, how to generate interest in the media, how to talk with your friends and neighbors, of course safely with protocols, in order to organize and push back on these folks. Because if we don't speak up on any of these issues that we care about, they'll just keep doing business as usual, and we'll all pay for it.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for caring.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. As you heard, her webpage or her website, taxpayer.com. Kris, do you have an email people can contact you directly at?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from them. They can email me anytime. It's the letter K, so for Kris, K Sims, S-I-M-S, at taxpayer.com. So ksims at taxpayer.com.
Or if you have a question for Kris, you can also send it to us at info@housestreet.com. Our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.